Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 10 essential operas for beginners. I'm almost afraid to do this one because, I just did the list of 10 essential piano sonatas for beginners, and God forbid, heaven forfend, I didn't include something by Schubert. And you people went bananas. And I told you at the very beginning that these lists are just wonderful, essential lists for beginners. They'll get around to Schubert. Doesn't have to be there. Doesn't matter if it's there or not there. I had my reasons, and I asked you all not to start getting into what should or should not be on the list, because I would just delete the comments. And I've been doing a lot of deleting the past day. Come on, stop it. It's just a list. It's my list. You can have your own list. These are good lists. I know what I'm talking about. I guarantee it. And no beginner is going to unbegin because they didn't get a Schubert piano sonata at the first shot. In fact, I'm telling you right now, don't worry about it. You'll get there. And opera is even nuttier because opera people are crazier. And this list, I'm going to say straight off, this is a very idiosyncratic list of operas. It isn't what you think it's going to be for the most part. And I have very, very good reasons for that, which I am going to explain to you. Others may dispute my theory for what makes great beginners opera, but I am going to stick to my guns. So I ask you once again, feel free to discuss the works that are on the list. That should be the discussion. I am not entertaining any other suggestions or replacements. None. Okay. So for all of you beginners, none of that really applied. It really didn't. But I have to say it because, even that is an education into the world of classical music, isn't it? Everyone's got an opinion. Everyone knows their opinion is better than the other guy's opinion. Everybody knows that there's always more that you can do. But I am really, really going to stress, more than even in previous talks, the need to take it slow, take things one at a time, understand what you're doing before moving on. And if you don't like something within the first 5 minutes, don't listen to it. It's all right. There's more. There's always more. It's all your own choice. Now, opera is difficult. Opera has its own conventions, many of them, and they changed over the centuries. It also has the need to get used to the unamplified but heavily trained human singing voice, the operatic voice, which some people simply detest. And I really understand that, because there are few things more detestable than an irritating voice. Whether it's singing or talking to you or nagging at you, or it's my kind of grainy voice, everyone has their own reaction to a voice. And if you don't like it, then spending 2.5 hours listening to it is torment, absolute torment. So again, opera is one of those things that's an acquired taste. And it's one well worth acquiring, because when opera is great, there is absolutely nothing like it. It is the most directly emotional and powerful musical expression probably that there is. But when it goes wrong, there is nothing crappier than opera that goes wrong. I mean, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Now, I have chosen these 10 operas for a very, very particular reason. They are not the normal ones, some of them aren't anyway, that you're most likely to have people talk to you about in the, average beginner's opera list. Most of them are either contemporary or short or comedic or something else. The reason I've done it, well, let me go through them, and I'll discuss each one and explain to you, and you'll understand, I think, and see what the logic behind the list is, and we'll take it from there. So we start with number one. Number one is Bizet's Carmen. Now, Carmen is definitely one of the ones that everyone is going to say is a great first opera. Why is that? Well, because it has all the tunes. And that's why I chose it. I chose it because everybody knows the tunes. I mean, if you've seen the Bad News Bears, if you watched a movie, you know Carmen. You know, Toreadora, don't spit on the floor, use the cuspidor, that's what it's for. I mean, you know. You know these melodies. But what you don't know, probably, is who sings them, why they sing them, and what happens. And that's why I think Carmen is a great place to start, because the tunes are going to be familiar, and learning what the story is, what occasions those tunes and what they mean is a wonderful thing. It's a great way to get into the medium. So Carmen is first. Now the story of Carmen is Carmen is a gypsy cigarette girl, sort of low rent character, and she seduces Don Jose, who's a good boy with a nice girlfriend from his little village, and he becomes completely head over heels in love, and she completely destroys his life, and so he stabs her to death when she dumps him for the bullfighter, Escamillo. I mean, that's the story. It's really very, very simple, but it's told in such vivid, marvelous ways, through such glorious music. And Carmen, by the way, is an opera comique. That doesn't mean comic opera. It means an opera with dialogue. It means a musical. It's close to a Broadway show in that sense. There is actual spoken dialogue, and some versions will have the spoken dialogue, and some versions will have that dialogue converted into what they call recitation, recitative, which is sung all the way through. Bizet himself did not write those recitatives. They were written after his death. He left it with dialogue. And so, however you choose, the nice thing about it with the dialogue is you can usually skip it. Just read what's happening, read what they say, and move on to the next number. But, opera is also a theatrical medium. So I usually talk about it as, a recording. But you can see all of this stuff on YouTube now, hundreds of them sometimes on YouTube. You can get DVDs, you can see it, download it and stream it, and videos and theatrical productions. I tend to prefer just to listen to them after I know what the story is. I read the text, the libretto, as it's called, the book, the words. You must know the words. You don't have to necessarily follow them while it's playing, but you have to know what they're saying and what the story is, so you can best enjoy the wonderful ways in which the composers write music that suits the story. I mean, that's the whole idea, right? And so Carmen is your first go. And the reason, by the way, that I don't normally watch operas is because I think most operatic productions are just so terrible that they're embarrassing. Not live. If you go see an opera live, it's almost always extraordinary, even if the performance sucks. I mean, seeing live people do live things, there's no real substitute for that. But the way that these things are filmed, usually the quality of the production is just so third rate. You see these unattractive people singing, and you get to see them up close. So you see all their theatrical makeup, and they spend all their time with their mouths agape and their uvula is vibrating. You get to watch that. And they don't know how to act, and the sets are crappy. And I just most of the time would rather listen. But I'm an exception there. I'm unusual in that respect, because I know most people will watch terrible productions and enjoy them. So that's me. That's me. You have to find your own way with it. And so I do suggest that you watch it and listen to it and decide which way you enjoy it best. Carmen is number one. Number two, Benjamin Britten, Peter Grimes. Now, here is the other observation I want to make about this list. There's a lot of contemporary stuff on it. And the reason for that is because contemporary opera is mostly musically continuous, that is, it doesn't have dialogue, but it does have, even if there aren't like those big romantic tunes all the way through, and the singing is somewhat conversational, it's usually easier to understand the words, and the music is much closer to film music, to the kind of music that we usually encounter today. That is, a story, something going on a screen with music underlaying it. And so I think the relationship between the words and the music and the overall storytelling is much, much more familiar to most of us today if we consider opera that's contemporary, rather than opera that was from the classical or Baroque periods or even the early Romantic periods, where the style and the conventions of what all those singers were doing were very, very different. There were different forms. It was a different kind of art form. And so for beginners, not saying you shouldn't get there, for beginners, and we have some of those, so don't worry, but for beginners, I think contemporary opera is a really good place to begin. And some of the stories Peter Grimes you probably don't know, but it's a wonderful opera. It's about a fisherman in an English village whose apprentice has died on his boat. He's gotten sick and died, and he's being tried. And he's acquitted because they find that the death is accidental. But he lives in a village where everybody is very gossipy, and they think that because he's a loner, that there's something suspicious going on there. And he goes to get another apprentice, and that apprentice dies too. He falls off a cliff. And again, it's not his fault, but by then it doesn't matter because the village is aroused against him, and he winds up committing suicide. This is not a happy tale, but it is a fabulously vivid one, full of wonderful vignettes of life in a fishing village and the colorful characters that inhabit the village, including a wonderful pair of hookers who are always singing as one person. There are two of them, but they have one personality, so they're always singing a duet. It's very interesting. The characterization is marvelous, and there's wonderful orchestral music. I mean, Benjamin Britten's 4C interludes from Peter Grimes is a very, very famous 20th century orchestral work, full of color and some wonderful tunes. There's a storm. There's Sunday morning with church bells. There's a brooding Passacaglia, big interlude over a ground bass. It's very, very powerful. There's a wonderful round at the end of Act 1 when there's a storm going on and they're all singing, "Old Joe has gone fishing and young Joe has gone fishing and you'll know who's gone fishing and found them a shoal." Whoop! Yeah, great stuff. So it's a wonderful work. It's a really good story. It has a really good text. It's in English. I mean, half the time when people sing, you can't understand what they're singing anyway, but it's in English, which is a helpful thing, and it's a masterpiece. So that's number 2. Number 3, Richard Strauss, Salome. This is the smut and porn opera. It's really licentious. It was written around 1905 and promptly banned in most places. I mean, Mahler, who was conductor in Vienna, desperately wanted to produce it there, but the censors would not permit it. In those days, all theaters had censors, and they would ban naughty things, and nothing is naughtier than Salome. Salome is the princess of Judea who falls in love with John the Baptist and wants to make love to him, but he refuses and curses her and says that she's grotesque and disgusting. So she does the dance of the 7 veils for her stepfather, Herod, and rips all of her clothes off and wiggles her pudenda at him, and he agrees to give her anything she wants. And what she wants is John the Baptist's head on a silver platter, and she gets it. And that is the most disturbing scene you've ever seen in your life. And there's actually, I really recommend that you watch it on video. You can probably find it on YouTube. It's with Catherine Malfitano and Giuseppe Sinopoli conducting. I think it's the Deutsche Oper Berlin or something. It is unbelievably creepy to see her sweating and drooling over this head. Oh my goodness. And so anyway, she gets the head and she kisses the head. And Herod says to his soldiers, "Kill that woman!" And they crush her to death beneath their shields. And it only takes an hour and a half. That's pretty good. I mean, it's the same length as Mahler's Third Symphony. The piece is basically a giant symphonic poem with like voices attached. The orchestration is as rich and decadent and sleazy and luminous and erotic as music could possibly get. It was guaranteed to cause a scandal, and it did. But it's a fabulous, fabulous opera and a wonderful study in obsession. Because all the characters are monsters. Herod is a monster. John the Baptist is a real monster. Strauss hated him. He thought he was a clown. He's just a religious zealot. And Salome is a psychotic, sociopathic nymphomaniac. I mean, they are the most unlovable characters you could possibly imagine on stage. And that's one of the things that makes it so fascinating. It's the fact that although this story is gross, it really is, the music is so voluptuous and so enticing and so perfect for what is going on there that we are led to accept it nonetheless. That's high art, folks. What can I tell you? It's a great opera to get yourself started. It really is, assuming you're not offended by the subject matter. I mean, offended in a bad way. You should be offended in a good way, the way that makes you want to keep coming back for more. So anyway, Salome is number 3. Number 4, Gershwin, Porgy and Bess. And I know some of you are going to say, he's just saying that he's American. He has to do something American. It's American. No, I say that because it's one of the great 20th century operas, period. It is one of the most perfect settings operatically. It's a deeply moving story. I think a lot of you probably know the story. Porgy is a handicapped, peddler, essentially. And Bess is a heroin-addicted girlfriend of the town bully. And they live in a poor black community in South Carolina and called Catfish Row. And Porgy eventually kills Bess's boyfriend. And while he's off answering questions from the police being investigated, Bess has a relapse and starts taking heroin again because her drug dealer is a guy named Sportin' Life who lures her away to go to New York. And when Porgy comes back, she's gone. And he decides to go after her to New York. And that's how it ends. But in the meantime, you get this wonderful portrait of, again, it's like the town in Peter Grimes. It's a community with all of these wonderful individual vignettes and characters, and it all comes so vividly to life. And of course, the style is Gershwin. It's fabulous tunes. It's summertime, and it ain't necessarily so. And I got plenty and nothing. And Bess, you is my woman now. And we know the tunes. They are beautifully set, and it's an incredibly touching and deeply, deeply moving work. It's a shame that because it's by Gershwin and because it's supposed to be, jazz influenced or populist or whatever, and because Gershwin himself, in order to sell the product, had to cut it down and arrange it and present it more as a musical than an opera, it's just really a pity that it doesn't get the respect it deserves, because it is unquestionably one of the great works for the lyric stage. And that is that. So it makes a wonderful, wonderful introduction to opera, because it's a real opera. I mean, it's a long opera. It's 3 hours long if you hear the whole thing. On the 2 great recordings, there's one on RCA and there's one on Decca. One conducted by Laurent Mazel and the other is the Houston Grand Opera under John DeMaine. Fabulous performances. Get one of those if you're going to get a recording. Otherwise, you could just watch a video. A stunning work. Really, really stunning work that deserves the greatest respect and attention and rewards it. So after that, let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Poulenc. Dialogues of the Carmelites. Now, this is an opera. First of all, it's an opera about a convent of nuns during the French Revolution that goes to the guillotine one by one and gets beheaded. That's the short end of it. Strange plot, right? A lot of these operas have unusual plot lines, because I think it's the unusual plot lines that makes it interesting. There's more to it than just that. The wider story is about a girl named Blanche de la Force, who joins a convent to run away because she's very French. She's very, neurotic. She's one of those neurotic French girls, who's always nervous and timid, and she joins a convent because she just can't deal with life. And when the revolution comes, it destroys wipes out her family and her wealth. She's a product of a wealthy, bourgeois household, and she realizes eventually that there is no escape. She can't run away, and she leaves the convent when they are all arrested for being enemies of the revolution. But at the very end, she returns, and she dies with them. And it's one of the most powerful closing scenes in all of opera. They sing a Salve Regina, and one by one you hear like this as the guillotine chops off their heads. And it's very similar to Salome in the sense that the scene is horrifying, but the music is gorgeous. It's so beautiful the way it's being set, and so moving. And more than that, the piece is a clinic in how to set natural dialogue to music. How to set dialogue to music naturally. You'll probably get a recording in French. It does exist on Chandos in English. It's just called The Carmelites. A good performance, by the way. Poulenc asked that it be performed in the language of the country in which it's being played. He wanted you to understand the words, and it's a very cinematic kind of presentation. The music is there to support and underline the conversations that are going on between this convent of nuns, and their conversations are rather interesting. This is not, oh, Sister Bertrille, put on your flying habit and go help Ricardo Montalban. This is interesting stuff, and a deeply, deeply moving story about faith and facing your own fears. It's incredibly powerful. And, one of the reasons I've chosen, again, these operas too, is because it's not the usual. It's not same old, same old. The story in opera is that there are two opera plots. There's the comic opera where they all get married, and there's the tragic opera where, they all die. But they're all like couples. They're in love. There's a love triangle. This is not about love interest. This is not sexual. This is different. And I think that that's really a wonderful thing. It shows you the range of what can be done, and really only was done in the 20th century, when the notion of what was an acceptable operatic plot started to expand. So, Dialogues of the Carmelites is fabulous. Next, Puccini. You have to do a Puccini. But I'm not doing the usual Puccini. I'm not doing Madame Butterfly. I'm not doing Tosca. I'm not doing La Bohème. I'm doing Gianni Schicchi. It's a one-act comedy. It lasts about an hour. It has one of Puccini's most famous arias, O mio babbino caro. O mio babbino caro. Something I don't know the words, but that's the tune. It's an aria that's 1 minute and 30 seconds long, or 2 minutes long. It's the world's shortest, one of the world's shortest arias, and one of the greatest tunes. It's absolutely beautiful, but it's a funny, light-hearted story. The opening of it was the opening music used in the film Prizzi's Honor, with Jack Nicholson and Kathleen Turner. It's really wonderful. That was the opening of Prizzi's Honor. But it's also the opening of Gianni Schicchi. It's the story of how a servant tricks a bunch of rich, greedy relatives of a guy who's just died. They all want what's in the will. They want everything. They want his money, and so they're all waiting for the reading of the will, and he tricks them into leaving everything to him, basically. Or he arranges things so that all of the wealth is left to him, and so his daughter can get married, and there's a subplot. And it's charming, and it's funny, and it's light, and it's just a good story. It's a good, funny story. It's funny by normal standards. It really is. It's quite humorous and a delightful opera. It's part of a trilogy called Il Trittico, the Three, the first of which is a really blood and thunder, tragic love triangle murder plot thing. And the second is Suor Angelica. It's a sort of spiritual thing about a nun who's had an illegitimate child which has died, and so she kills herself, and even though she's committed suicide, which is theoretically a mortal sin, she sees her child beckoning her to, into heaven, and it's very beautiful. It's called Suor Angelica. And then there's Gianni Schicchi, which is the name of the clever servant. The clever servant is like a topic in opera. There are lots of comic operas that feature clever servants. The most famous is Figaro, as in The Marriage of Figaro, or The Barber of Seville, who was also Figaro. It's the same guy. So best to get used to your clever servants in a light and simple way that doesn't last much more than an hour. I think that's a great way to get into it. And after Gianni Schicchi by Puccini, we have, and of course the list is down below as always, another comedy, Smetana, The Bartered Bride. Now this is a marriage comedy. It's a marriage comedy set in Czechoslovakia, so you're probably going to hear about it in Czech, or hear it sung in Czech, which is one of the most sort of unresonant languages in the world, but somehow in opera they make it work. It's another great story. It's a funny story. It's about, a guy and a girl who fall in love, but her parents wanted her to enter into an arranged marriage with, the son of a rich couple. But it turns out, at the end of the day, that the guy she's already in love with is the banished elder son of said rich man, not the evil stepmother who had him dismissed. And so they're already in love, but he arranges with the marriage broker a contract that he takes money to supposedly put her aside. But the real deal is he has to marry the son of the rich guy. That's the contract, that she has to marry the son of a rich guy. So when she finds out that he's really the elder son of the rich guy, she wanted to marry him anyway, and it all works out at the end, and the younger son turns out to be an idiot, so no one cares, and that's the story. But it's full of, it's what they call a village opera. The Romantic era is full of them, where you have happy peasants cavorting around in colorful clothing, doing jolly little native dances. And, some people despise happy peasants cavorting around doing jolly little native dances. It's just like some people hate children in opera. I don't like children in opera. There's a children's chorus in Carmen. I think they spend way too much time on stage. They have a whole thing for themselves. They pretend to be little soldiers and they march around, and it's just like, get rid of them. Get rid of them. Well, some people feel the same way about peasants and peasant dances. That's a matter of taste. The fact of the matter is, this is a wonderful comic opera, very, very quick moving, with really well-drawn characters, and it's just enormous fun. And I think we should have some fun when we're getting to know these works. I could have picked other comic operas. We could have done The Barber of Seville. We could have done Mozart. But those operas, as I've said, they subscribe to a slightly different set of musical conventions. And once you're used to what opera is and are receptive to all of the things that it can be, that's when I would go and start listening to those earlier works, famous though they are. Now, I have an exception. The exception is if you're going to go see them live. If you're going to go to the opera, go see anything. It doesn't make a damn bit of difference. Just go see it. And I guarantee you'll have a good time. But if you're going to be listening to it or watching it on a YouTube video or in some, awful production with miserable filmography, then I suggest you work with this list a little bit and see what you can find. So after The Bartered Bride, we have Verdi Rigoletto. This is the earliest opera, I think, in this entire list. Well, no, there are two, actually. They're contemporary. Rigoletto is just a fabulous, fabulous story. I mean, famous story with one of the most famous tunes in all of opera, right? La donna è mobile, da 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 da, ya da 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 da, and lots of other big tunes in it too. It's a story about a hunchback court jester who is the enabler, let's say, of the Duke of Mantua, who is this disgusting, licentious pig who wants to screw every guy in court, and his jester arranges these assignations, finds these girls for him to have his way with. And there's, at the end of scene one of the, the outraged father of one of them shows up and curses Rigoletto and the Duke, actually both of them. And what happens ultimately is that the Duke, disguised as a student, has been serenading this very attractive young girl who turns out to be Rigoletto's daughter. And so he gets caught in his own web. And Gilda is her name, and she is kidnapped and made love to, but she falls in love with the Duke, who's very handsome and very, sleazy, and she's very naive. And so Rigoletto plots to kill the Duke. And the result of this whole thing is that she gets wind of it, and so she decides to sacrifice herself for the Duke because she loves him. And that's what happens. And she gets stabbed and dumped in a sack and delivered to Rigoletto as his vengeance. And he thinks he has the Duke. But when he opens the sack, it's his own daughter. It's very, very tragic and very beautiful. And then, of course, even though she's been stabbed through the lungs, she still manages to sing a death duet with her dad, because that's one of those conventions that I have been studiously trying to avoid having you encounter. But for the purposes of this opera, it's worth doing. Yes, she has to sing for about 6 or 7 minutes before she finally expires, even though she has, a punctured lung or something like that. Well, maybe she was stabbed in the stomach. It's okay. But that's what happens. And so, it's another fabulous story and a fabulous score full of color and passion, and it just hits you in the solar plexus. It's amazing, absolutely amazing. And it moves really quickly. Again, I want things that move. This stuff, I don't want you to have to sit around on your butt for 3 hours going, what's happening next, I mean, all of these operas move very quickly. They are what I call cinematic in construction. And so that's why I've chosen them. Next, Wagner. Now, what do you think I'm going to choose by Wagner? Wagner's operas, well, they don't move very quickly. I mean, that was the whole thing with Wagner. They move at best at a magisterial pace, but there is one that does, and it's Das Rheingold. Now, nobody says that should be your first, Wagner opera, but they're wrong. They are so wrong. They are totally wrong. Usually people say, oh, Tristan and Isolde, which is 4.5 hours, in which even Wagner said nothing happens. Or they say, I mean, the music is glorious, but not much happens. Or they say Die Walküre, the next one in this series of 4 operas that all together make up the Ring of the Nibelungen, a 17-hour-long opera that takes place over 4 days. I'm not asking you to do the 4 days. Das Rheingold is actually only a bit more than 2 hours long, maybe 2 hours and 15 minutes, 2.5 hours if you're pushing it. And it's in one continuous act. It plays all the way through without a pause. And the music is continuous. The music is film music. It's that simple. It is gloriously continuous. And it's a great story. Again, you don't have to hear the rest of it right away. I mean, do you like Lord of the Rings? It's that story. It's that kind of, you've got Wotan, or who's Odin, the Norse god. And you have a nasty little dwarf called Alberic, and Alberic makes the Ring of Power. He steals the gold from the river Rhine, where it's being guarded by the Rhine maidens, and he makes this magic ring that will make him master of the universe. And Wotan tricks him out of it. And because he's been tricked out of it, he's very annoyed, and he curses the ring permanently so that whoever wears it has awful things happening to them. And that will work its way out in the next 4 operas. But in the first one, all that you need to know is that Wotan gets the ring, and he and his, he's had a castle, Valhalla, the castle, built by a couple of giants, and in order to be paid, he has to give them the ring. And of course, the curse works because they immediately start fighting over it. And one of them kills the other one. And Wotan is worried, but not terribly. And he and his fellow gods walk over the Rainbow Bridge. Did you ever see the movie Thor? That superhero movie? They have a rainbow bridge into Valhalla. And that's where it ends. And it ends with a big, huge climax with 6 harps and tons of brass. And it's going, da-dum, bum, ba ba ba. The harps are all whipping along, and it's just glorious. And it could end right there, and we'd be perfectly happy. You wouldn't have to see any of the rest of it. But the reason I chose Das Rheingold is because it comes as close to what the ideal of what Wagner allegedly stood for, which was continuous music, symphonically developed, based on recurring motives or ideas that symbolize the various characters and things. There's a theme for the curse, there's a theme for the ring, there's a theme for the rainbow bridge, there's all of these characters and people, and Valhalla has a tune, and the Rhine Maidens, the Rhine River has a tune, and all of these things are woven together into a glorious stream of continuous melody. And this opera was written at just about the same time, around 1850, 51, 49, 48, somewhere in there, as Rigoletto, which marked just as much of a revolution in the history of Italian opera. And so, Verdi and Wagner were working on parallel tracks. And this is a great way, trust me, to get into Wagner. Yeah, you can hear the Ride of the Valkyries in the next opera. But once you've heard the Ride of the Valkyries, which is the beginning of Act 3, what are you going to do for the other 4 hours of it? You know what I mean? I really, really can't stress strongly enough that Wagner was just an impossibly great composer. He really, really was. But if you're getting into opera, the idea of opera generally, I would not start with one of Wagner's longer and later works. They tend to be a world unto themselves, and you'll work your way into it. If you do Das Rheingold, you're set up for the other Ring operas, and you can explore them at your leisure. Or something else by Wagner. But Das Rheingold is just wonderful. It really is, all the way through. It just from beginning to end, it has no dead spots. It's just terrific. So that's that. However, I have one final choice, number 10, and it's Janáček's Jenufa. Now, Janáček is the great Czech opera composer of the 20th century. Well, probably the great Czech opera composer, period, or one of them. I mean, there were three. There was Smetana, there was also Dvorak, and Martin, who wrote really great operas too. But Janáček's operas are a phenomenon. First of all, of course, they're in Czech. They're relatively short. They're really relatively short. They last about an hour and 45 minutes, usually, maybe up to 2 hours if you're pushing it. That's the first thing. The second thing is they are the most immediately, emotionally passionate, gripping, devastatingly powerful operas that anybody ever wrote, especially because they're so compressed and they move so quickly. And many of them have very strange plots. I mean, he did a science fiction opera about a 300-year-old opera singer. He did an opera, The Cunning Little Vixen, based on a cartoon strip. He did From the House of the Dead, set in a Siberian prison camp. I mean, he did really interesting topics. But Jenůfa is a more conventional topic. It's pretty straightforward. Jenůfa is a lovely country lass who is going to get married to Števa, who is a complete jerk. She is also loved by Števa's stepbrother, László, and she treats him very, very badly. And so he wants to grab a kiss, and while they're struggling, he slashes her cheek. And when he slashes her cheek, she is no longer beautiful. She's been disfigured. And Števa, who is an absolute slug, dumps her immediately because she's not pretty enough for him. And the problem is he was a catch because he was going to inherit the mill, the town mill, and she's pregnant. And she has a foster mother named Kostelnička. And Kostelnička is the keeper, the sextoness, the keeper of the church keys. And she is very religious and very strict and hard as nails. And so when she finds out Jenůfa is pregnant, she shuts her away in her house for the entire winter in time for her to give birth, and prays that the baby will die, which often happened in those days. The babies would die in childbirth. This one happens to be perfectly healthy. And so the Kostelnička decides to help it along a little bit by drugging Jenůfa, taking the baby and stuffing it under the ice in the river in the winter and drowning it, which is horrifying. And then she arranges that Jenůfa should get married. And Števa still rejects her. He's now going to marry the mayor's daughter, or so he thinks. And Lotsa, who originally slashed her, still is in love with her, and he's very remorseful and wants to marry her, and he gets her to agree, even though she's just been drugged and told her baby is dead. So she's a little woozy when she makes that agreement. But they agree to get married, and the Kostelnichka, who realizes that she has done a terrible, terrible, terrible thing, committing infanticide, begins to lose her mind. And that's the end of Act Two. And Act Two of Jenufa. Act One is, the joke in the operatic world is, you have the bartered bride, and then you have the battered bride, or the bartered broad, or the battered broad. One of those things, because they're both Czech, and you have this first act that's full of colorful village people doing colorful Czech village peasant-like things. But they do it in a very different way in Jenufa. First of all, there are no arias, like long-breathed melodic aria things. Janáček was interested in the natural rhythm of Czech speech. And so he wrote brief, very catchy little melodic fragments that he puts together like a mosaic sort of thing. And that's what these characters sing. But it's incredible. But the music, the flow of the music is just unquenchably expressive. And Act Two is one of the all-time great acts in all of opera, because it does what opera exists for, which is to show women in extremis. That's what opera does. You show women under extreme emotional pressure, and they scream their heads off. That's why we go. Get used to it. That's what you're going to be going for. And in Act Two of Jenufa, you get two of them in extremis screaming their heads off, one after the other. The scene where the Kostelnichka works herself up to kill the baby and takes the baby and runs out is one of the most harrowing pieces of music in all of opera. And I have a separate video about it, which I recommend that you see. It's called The Most Harrowing 5 Minutes in All of Opera. Just look in the Janáček playlist, or search under harrowing or something in the search engine on my YouTube channel homepage, and you can listen to that scene. It's whoosh. Really. And then there's another scene after she's gone. Jenufa wakes up and is looking for her baby, and her baby's gone, and she's been drugged, and she doesn't know what's going on, and she's delirious and delusional, and she goes crazy, and that's just like the beginning of the second act. Then they have all these scenes with the marriage and proposal and all that stuff. So then we get to Act 3, and we just get stuck in Act 2. It's so powerful. In Act 3, we have the wedding, and Jenufa is getting ready to get married, and she's starting to feel a little bit better after one hell of a winter, and Lotsa's quite pleased, and the whole village is turning out, and the Kostelnichka is completely a mess. She's gone completely to pieces. She's completely depressed and hysterical, and she's, fearful that God is going to come and snatch her away or suck her down to hell, And it's spring, and it's lovely out, and the river has just thawed, and guess who pops up? Yeah, little Steva pops up. And Jenufa recognizes the little cap that she knitted for him, and they think that she killed the baby, so they go after her. And Lotsa stands in front and says he's going to kill anyone who touches her. And the Kostelnichka comes forward and confesses. And she explains why she did, and she agrees to go to prison and all of that stuff. And Jenufa understands that she did it because of her own, First she's revolted and knocks her over, but then she says, no, it's okay, get up. You did what you did for me, and I can forgive you, and I'll go to jail. Go directly to jail. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. So everybody goes out, and Kostelnichka gets locked up. This is, by the way, it's based on a true story. That's what's even more interesting about this opera. It's actually based on a true story. And so the Kostelnichka goes, and only Jenufa and Lotsa are left, and Jenufa turns to him and says, now you go too. There's going to be a trial. I'm going to be disgraced. My life has been a total horror. You don't want to attach yourself to somebody as miserable as I am. You can't do that to yourself. Go have a happy life. And he says, I don't care. He says, as long as we have each other, I don't give a damn what happens. And that's the end. And it ends with them actually, she begins to feel love again. And he, understands, I don't know how to describe it. If you aren't a quivering puddle when this opera is over, then you are not human. I think it's one of the most moving and true-to-life portraits of human beings in all of opera, because they all have deep, terrible flaws, and they all sort of somehow, even the Kostelnička, they somehow grow and achieve a kind of self-realization and a higher moral understanding, and the music follows them every step of the way. The final duet with just Lotsa and Jenufa is just one of the most heart-wrenchingly beautiful and uplifting pieces of music that anybody ever wrote. It's stunning, absolutely stunning. And so that's where I think your initial encounter with opera should be headed. You may want to start with Jenufa if you can, don't have a problem listening to something sung in Czech. You follow the words, sit down, follow. It's not so long, it's not difficult. Take it one act at a time, 35 minutes, maybe 30, 35, 40 minutes at a time. Have a snack, listen to another one, do it over 3 days. Take your time, but listen deeply, listen to the words, and you will have an amazing experience. Now, just this list of 10, it should take you, 2 years to get through it. I'm just kidding. It's going to take you as long as it takes. You do it at your own pace, obviously. But there's some unbelievable music here. And I hope that some of these pieces really speak to you and give you a sense of just how amazing the medium of opera can be in the hands of a genius. And once you know these, look, you're not wedded to this list. Go off it if you want to. If you want to go hear one of those other ones, one of the Mozarts or the other Verdis or Donizetti or Bellini or another Wagner or Weber, do it. Listen to whatever you want to listen to. These are just works that I've chosen because I think they offer an entree, particularly for those of you who either don't like operatic singing or aren't familiar with what operas are. And I hope that they work for you. That's all I can say. I've done my best. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.